So I'm seeing 3 commissioners present so far, 4, including myself. And 5. Have we heard from anyone that cannot attend? No? Well, is a quorum 5? Is that correct? Okay. And now we have 6. So I think I'll go ahead and start, and we might be joined in a few minutes by Commissioners Dye and Podar. Commissioner Morgan Will is not joining us today. He'll be joining us next time. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Deborah Lockwood, Chair of the Washington County Planning Commission. Today is January 5th, 2022, and this meeting of the Planning Commission is called to order. May we have the roll call, please?
Yes, Chair Lockwood.
Oh, present.
Thank you. Thought I was on mute. Vice Chair Dye is not here yet. Commissioner Habener.
Present.
Commissioner Podar. Not seeing Commissioner Podar. Commissioner Petrillo.
Present.
Commissioner Wellner.
Present, thanks.
Commissioner Milliman.
Present.
And Commissioner Maury Bideau.
Present.
Great. So we have 6 commissioners present. We have a quorum.
Thank you. May we have the director's report, please?
You may. So Happy New Year, first off. So a couple of things. So you did mention the new commissioner, Commissioner Morgan Will, does plan to be here on the 19th for his first meeting. On the 18th of January, the board is scheduled to take action on Ordinance 865. You may recall this is the ordinance that puts urban land use designations on the UGB expansion lands, and that whole process was under appeal for a long time, and all those appeals have finally been resolved. So the board has been continuing that ordinance until the appeals were resolved, and that has happened. So we expect that they'll take action on that on the 18th. Also on the 18th, the board will hear Ordinance 882 and 883 that you took action on in December. I do want to mention a small clarification on Ordinance 883, something that happened that we will be sending the staff report to the board on that within the next few days. And so it's important for us just to clarify something that happened. So on Ordinance 883, you voted 3 in favor, 2 against, and 1 abstaining to recommend not approving the ordinance. And at the time, everyone in attendance, I believe, thought, okay, that's a 3-2 vote, so it passed. After the fact, we went back and looked at the Planning Commission rules, and essentially it's a vote of the majority of folks who are present at the meeting that it takes to pass a motion. So that would have been 4 votes. So previously to that motion, you voted to recommend, and that failed 4-2. But at the time, we thought that the motion passed. In fact, it didn't pass because there weren't the 4 votes. So this is kind of complicated, but I will be explaining it in the staff report to the board. But I just wanted you to be aware of it in case any of you read it. I don't think it changes sort of the discussion or the fact that there was kind of a split on the Planning Commission on this issue. But I just wanted you to be aware that that's something I wish we would have caught at the time, but we sort of implied that it had passed, and in fact, because there weren't the 4 votes, it didn't. On the 4th, yesterday, the board did adopt a resolution and order for an Indigenous land acknowledgement. In my humble opinion, this is a good thing. We are taking the next steps will be that the county administrative office has been given the charge to implement sort of when and where and how the land acknowledgement will take place, and there also will be some staff training associated with that. So we'll keep you informed as the board tells us sort of what the next steps are. Tonight we have 2 briefings, one on HB 2001 in terms of sidewalk and right-of-way requirements associated with those development applications, and also to talk about middle housing land divisions. Our upcoming meeting on 1/19 is a little light right now. We anticipate having other briefings on middle housing, and we know we have some minutes, but there's some chance that it could get canceled. So we'll kind of keep that open for now. And if you want to have a discussion about that, Chair, at the end of the meeting about how folks are feeling about having a meeting with a light agenda, that would be welcomed. But right now, we can have a meeting. We don't have a ton of stuff on it, so it's sort of at your discretion whether you want to cancel it or not. And that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. I want to note that Commissioners Podar and Blake joined us several minutes ago. And are there any comments or questions for Mr. Back? Commissioner Wellner.
I just have a quick question about today's agenda. I don't recall, and it could be me, but I don't recall receiving the minutes that we're supposed to be considering under agenda item 6. If we did, can you forward them to me so that I can take a quick gander at them while we're in this meeting?
Go ahead.
Those minutes were part of the packet for the December 15th meeting, and they were deferred at that time to this meeting. So we didn't send them out again. We could right now, if you'd like to, have us do that so that you have them in front of you now, because you may not have that last packet.
If it's not too much trouble, I'd like to take a quick look at them.
Anything else? Okay, I don't see any other hands up. Do we have anyone signed up for oral communications for items not on the agenda?
We do not have anybody signed up for oral communications today.
Okay, thank you. Let's go ahead then to our work session.
Ms. Chair, there is a hand raised though in that.
Oh, thank you. And I'm missing whose hand it is.
I believe it's Fran Warren.
Well, and also I see Vice Chair Dye. You.
My hand was in error.
Okay. So, Fran, we have a citizen member of the public who would like to speak during oral communications. Am I understanding that?
Yes.
Okay. Well, please go ahead. And at this point in the agenda, you have up to 5 minutes. And would you start by stating your name and address?
My name is Fran Warren, and my address is 835 Southwest Touchmark Way, and it's Portland, Oregon, unincorporated Washington County. And I just wanted to remind the Planning Commission that I happen to be on the DCLD State Community Involvement Advisory Committee. And this year we're going to be taking a look at Goal 1 in particular. And if there are any questions anyone on the Planning Commission might have, or any issues that you would like for the DCLD to undertake regarding Goal 1, please feel free to let me know or bring it up in your topics, because we are going to take it all under advisement. And if you have any other issues or questions, I would be more than happy to be a liaison for you. Just wanted to remind you that I'm here for you.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks very much. Any other people signed up? Mr. Walter?
No, not that I was aware of.
Okay, thank you. All right, I think we're ready now for the work session. First on HB 2001.
Right, and Ann Kelly will be giving the presentations.
Thank you. Hello, commissioners. This presentation is on middle housing frontage improvements. And we will just give you a brief rundown on our direction so far. Next slide, please. So in unincorporated Washington County, of districts that are eligible for middle housing, many were created by subdivision or partition and have already been required to provide frontage improvements. But depending on the age of the subdivision or partition, there are some that don't include full frontage improvements. It's kind of hit or miss. As early as the 1950s, we often required public streets, curbs, and sidewalks, and sometimes even sewers and lighting, much of this through FHA requirements. And today, we typically require half streets that include sidewalks, curbs, sewers, and we also require lighting normally. So regardless of the price point, there are some older lots and subdivisions that do lack much of these improvements, as you can see here in this photo. So next slide, please. Senate Bill 458 does allow. Can I
ask a question?
Oh, yeah, sure.
You asked us to notice something in the last photo, but could you point out what you were wanting us to notice?
You can sort of see that along parts of these, it looks like there's only sidewalk along one side of the street here. There may or may not be curb along some of these. So some of these older subdivisions may have partial improvements, not full improvements, and some don't have any, just roadway and a ditch. Next slide, please. So if middle housing does go through the expedited land division process that's allowed under Senate Bill 458, we are allowed to require right-of-way dedication and those typical frontage improvements that we normally get. But if middle housing is proposed where all units will be on one shared lot, we are much more limited in what we can require. HB 2001, beyond duplexes, so for triplexes, quadplexes, cottage clusters, and townhouses, we are allowed to require what they're calling sufficient infrastructure. And that amounts to sewer, water, and storm drainage, as well as access via public or private streets meeting emergency vehicle access standards. And emergency vehicle access standards do not include things like sidewalks or curbs. So in order to get those things, we can also require the same improvements that we would require for a single detached house. Currently, we don't have any requirements. Next slide, please. So we do have some policy considerations we've been mulling over, and for middle housing on one lot, if the county wants to require more extensive improvements than we do right now for a single detached house, or more than what's described under sufficient infrastructure, we have to amend our community development code to require those same things for a detached dwelling. We also have to consider nexus and proportionality between one detached dwelling and its potential impact on traffic and roads. We can't really be requiring an extent of frontage improvements that would make a house infeasible. So we need to limit requirements accordingly. For example, we are looking to propose sidewalk and right-of-way requirements only, rather than full half streets. These are priorities shared by some of our board members, as well as a large contingent of community members. Sidewalk gaps have been an issue for a long time. And right-of-way dedications can facilitate future road projects where acquisitions are normally needed. This is also in keeping with a transportation system plan objective that looks to provide pedestrian networks that are safe, comfortable, and convenient for people of all ages and abilities, something we've been working hard at for at least 25 years. Next slide, please. Other policy considerations relate to legal complexities, constitutionality, and proportionality, like I just described, making certain that the requirements are not so burdensome that somebody couldn't build a single dwelling if they wanted to. There are potential challenges and risks involved in requiring even just sidewalk and right-of-way. And this is affecting how local jurisdictions throughout Oregon are approaching potential to require things like this. So Portland does propose requirements for right-of-way and sidewalk, as well as fee in lieu. Most jurisdictions are still analyzing this, including Beaverton, Clackamas, and Milwaukee. And cities like Eugene and Hillsborough are not considering requiring right-of-way or sidewalk. Several cities and localities have drafted exemptions for conversions of existing dwellings into middle housing, or for existing dwellings that will remain on a property. Next slide, please. So as I noted just a couple minutes ago, we are recommending limiting public improvement requirements for middle housing and for one detached dwelling to just sidewalk and right-of-way dedication. This will be new for single detached dwellings that are not part of a subdivision. And I should underscore that when when a single detached dwelling has been part of a subdivision or is part of a current subdivision proposal, we do require full frontage improvements. This would only impact lots that are not part of a subdivision, or we're not required to provide frontage improvements as part of an old subdivision, for example. So our options include, when we're looking at middle housing with units all on one lot, our options include requiring both sidewalk and right-of-way, as we recommend, or just sidewalk, or just right-of-way, or not requiring either of those things for a single detached dwelling or middle housing. Another option would be additionally or instead considering a fee in lieu of improvements, and we are kind of making way for that in our current draft standards. Next slide, please. I guess that concludes the presentation today. Do you have questions?
Commissioner Wellner. I think you're muted.
A quick question about stormwater. Do we know, or have we talked with Clean Water about the addition of these impervious surfaces for construction of a duplex and what impact they might have on the need to provide water quality and detention facilities?
No, we haven't gotten in that deep with them. We do have some discussion going back and forth about how to require evidence of sufficient infrastructure to the extent that storm and sewer are needed. But we haven't gotten down to the detail level of impervious surfaces and so forth with them.
I guess that it'd be important to understand if this would trigger requirements within the district's design and construction standards that wouldn't otherwise be triggered if these sidewalks weren't being required in the first place.
Okay, related to sidewalks. We have not, but there are provisions in the code existing and with some amendments that do allow for exemptions to sidewalks in certain cases. And we will be talking further with Clean Water Services, but mostly we'll be relying on their provisions and their existing standards for what's determined adequate.
I guess what I'm saying is it would be helpful to hear from staff what that means. So it's because I'm assuming that there's going to be projects, middle housing projects that don't get built because stormwater requirements are going to get triggered if we say sidewalks need to get built at the same time. So it'd be good to be able to kind of evaluate that, have some understanding of it before making any kind of recommendation on it.
Okay, so you're thinking the sidewalks themselves triggering some other treatment requirement as compared to just the site development with homes, potentially driveways, parking areas, and so forth?
Potentially, yeah.
We can certainly provide information about that.
Yeah.
Prior to your first hearing on the ordinance.
Sure. That is noted. Thank you. I'm sorry I don't have full details today, but I will look into it. We will look into it. Are there other questions? Oh,
Yes, we've got. Go ahead, Ms. Kelly. Did you call on Commissioner Havener?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice presentation, Kelly. Just a couple things to add on to Commissioner Wellner's comment about stormwater. One of the things that I wondered was about alternate transportation. If we don't have sidewalks and setback areas, what do we do about bicycle traffic that we're trying to increase in some of these areas? And then the other question that I wondered about was what happens when it's not a development, but it ends up being a checkerboard type approach where one lot decides to do a duplex and the next lot's a single family dwelling and then the next one's a triplex where something's required. It seems to me that on a neighborhood approach that there needs to be some consideration. Otherwise, once again, and just from an experience from the public sector, every project that TVF and R has done in the past required some kind of stormwater retention, sidewalk improvements, curbs, half-street improvements for bicycling, traffic signaling devices, on and on and on.
Yeah.
And yet our lots some of them are smaller actually than what a single-family dwelling or a duplex might be placed upon in unincorporated areas. So it doesn't seem to be a fair treatment of the land use there.
Exactly. We have all been kind of, I guess, dumbfounded from the beginning of HB 2001 as to, I mean, it's a paradigm switch for us. You know, we are used to being able to require full public street frontage improvements for development, and we are now limited by state decree. So there will be some discrepancies between what we can require for middle housing versus what we can require for other developments. And on your other question related to the neighborhood overall, where there might be different types of middle housing or just one home proposed, I don't think there will be a great deal of difference because we are requiring the same things for one house or for a duplex as we would be for middle housing in terms of the sidewalk and the right-of-way requirement. Relating to bike traffic and bike lanes, we can't require those for middle housing or a single dwelling because those are not emergency vehicle access standards. But we are looking to get the right-of-way that could accommodate improvements like that in the future, at least.
Thank you.
Commissioner, Vice Chair Dye.
Would you mind just revisiting this, the last bullet of your last slide when you talked about a fee in lieu of? And I guess I just want a little bit more coloring around what does that look like?
I might call on Andy back to talk about that, but we're thinking, well, actually our code does include provisions already where we can require a fee in lieu for improvements that are not provided that would normally be required, including sidewalks. But that fee in lieu is not really spelled out yet officially. So we are leaving room to require a fee in lieu as long as it's consistent with an adopted fee in lieu structure that's adopted by the County Board of Commissioners. So it really wouldn't apply until that happens.
So maybe to add, so we know in some cases, you know, where you only maybe have one house that's going to redevelop on a street, that just building the sidewalk for 50 feet, there may be more cost-effective ways of getting a better sort of sidewalk pedestrian system in the neighborhood. So Portland has a system where they have a fee in lieu. I think that the costs are rather high, but a lot of it is when you would allow that and how would you spend the money? Would you have to spend the money on that lot, or could you spend it within 200 feet or within the neighborhood? So sort of how we're looking at is we don't have the time right now to adopt a program for fee in lieu as part of this ordinance, but we want to set it up that that's something the board's interested in doing in the future, that they could just adopt that program and then automatically the code would allow a fee in lieu if that program's in place.
So that would mean the builder would contribute to a fund where the public was going to provide more sidewalk instead of having the person build the sidewalk. Okay.
Correct. And whether that money would just be used when from other fee and lieu, or whether it could be used as a match with other funds. There's lots of different possibilities there.
Commissioner Petrillo.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I wanted to, so I guess, Ms. Kelly, what are you expecting, or what are your expectations for what you need from Planning Commission today? Just comment, or are you looking for a position on this, or recommendation?
I think this is just more an informational brief, but certainly comments are welcome, and I'm grateful for the ones we've received from commissioners so far. If you have comments, I'd be happy to take them.
Well, I just didn't know as a whole, so you're not necessarily looking for a recommendation from the Planning Commission as a whole. In that vein, I don't support adding sidewalk improvements to our middle housing requirement. The reason is it starts. You have an echo. It starts chipping away at the public policy goals of 2001 when we start adding other public policy goals, which are unrelated to what 2001 is trying to accomplish. It's not that the sidewalk policy or interest in sidewalk connectivity is not merit, doesn't have merit. It has high merit. We have a patchwork throughout the county, which is due to what you described as a development trend over the last 70 years. However, 2001 is trying to create more housing variety and more infill housing that's in between sort of traditional single family housing, which is getting larger and larger, and multifamily. And the idea is that it creates more variety that gives citizens more opportunities, or community members more opportunities for different housing types, as well as more affordability, particularly in hopefully in areas where single family housing zoning has unintentionally or inadvertently created created disincentives for affordable housing, or I should say middle housing types. So by adding on this requirement with sidewalks, I would prefer that we deal with the sidewalk connectivity as a separate issue versus tagging it on to middle housing. The way I view housing development as it relates to how this ordinance will be used and implemented and used in the future is I view sort of three types of development. You have sort of master plan projects, large South Hillsborough, North Bethany, I mean, several hundred home developments. And then you have smaller, which will do sidewalk improvements and half street improvements, they'll be required to. And then you have sort of what's maybe under 100 units, maybe between 15 and 100 units being developed, probably more like 15 to 50. And again, those are going to, those type of developments will also be subject to requirements for sidewalk improvements or frontage improvements and half street improvements and all that. The number of lots where middle housing would come into play, and then there's the set of these parcels which are larger parcels which have a single family home on them that were developed in the 50s, 60s, perhaps even earlier. And they are ripe for middle housing infill development opportunities. In fact, you're already beginning to see it in terms of just people buying, particularly like in the southwest portions of the county and some other areas. So a homeowner or a small developer could go in and buy a single family house on a larger lot and maybe be able to put in 3 homes under middle housing. Or perhaps a homeowner wants to do that for a variety of reasons. That's where I view the sidewalk portion requirement being is not proportional, and I don't think it's just an issue of legal proportionality. I think the sidewalk improvements are expensive, and there would be people would say, that's an extra extra X thousand I'm going to have to add on. I'm not going to do it, and so I do think that I would prefer the ordinance not included. That said, I do see that it's in the public interest for there to be right-of-way dedication. I think that's the key part, so that once an area that maybe was developed in the 50s and doesn't have great sidewalk connectivity, as it develops further with more and more housing or more density, then the right-of-way is there for future connectivity, if there's a program for sidewalk development. So in terms of comment and feedback, I hope you'll take that as one more piece that is dissenting from, I think, what most of the people are saying, perhaps except for Commissioner Wellner, but realizing that we're adding on something. We're putting public policy goals in conflict. Middle housing, that starts pulling. It makes it harder to do when we start adding more and more requirements. So I hope that you'll take that seriously. And if in the ordinance itself, once it's published and considered, I would be looking for that and looking to even engross it if it's included. So thank you for.
Commissioner Havener.
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts to follow up on Commissioner Petrillo's. I agree. The right of way is one of the tools that needs to be in place. But then all of a sudden it shifts the responsibility of infrastructure improvements from the developer to a fund that looks like or might be established by the government. And I don't know if that's the right share of the burden. With my time at TVF&R, we bought and sold properties in the rural area or unincorporated area. We sold a piece of property in Aloha to a developer, ended up with a small enough parcel they could only put 3 single-family homes in it or duplexes in it. And guess what was required? Full street, sidewalks, stormwater improvements, etc. So we're doing it already. We have people that are doing that already on small lots. And I appreciate your comment about creating or disincentivizing the affordability of affordable housing. But then you might have the argument that, well, then why do I need to tie into the sewer system? Or why do I need to pay for an electrical permit? Or those are safety issues as well. And as you increase density and you're not accommodating the additional foot traffic that'll be from neighborhood to neighborhood, or 4th of July fireworks and fire trucks entering the space, etc. I think that the burden of the profit, if you will, somebody's going to make money off of these houses. They're not going to be net zero. That should fall on the developer, not on the governmental agencies. That's all.
Commissioner Wellner.
I don't necessarily disagree with Commissioner Havener, and I definitely agree with what I heard from Commissioner Petrillo. It's not that the sidewalk improvements are inappropriate for to be paid for by the development of a duplex or a triplex or a fourplex. It's the way we're going about doing it, I think, that bugs me. The county hasn't required sidewalk improvements of a building permit on these individual lots. And what we're proposing to do now is they've never required it. There's never been a requirement to go build sidewalks when you go pull a building permit, if those sidewalks aren't already there. And what we're doing is we're changing it for all of those existing vacant lots. How many of them there are, I don't know how many there are. There might be 3, there might be 3,000. So that we can then require middle housing to provide that sidewalk connection. And it seems a little counterintuitive to me when the goal of middle housing is, as Jeff put it, was to create more affordability and more opportunity. And so not only are we trying to create the ability to condition a middle housing product, we're also changing the way we've dealt with an individual building permit for the last 20 plus years. So I understand the importance of creating these sidewalk connections. I don't know that this is the right way to go about fixing that problem. I definitely think that the right-of-way issue is the biggest issue, because if you don't get it now, then it's hard. It becomes more and more difficult to get it down the road, and it becomes an expense down the road. So I would definitely be supportive of requiring a right-of-way dedication of middle housing. I don't know at this point if I'd be open to the sidewalk improvement being tied to that as well.
I think Commissioner Potter was next.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Lockwood. My comments is in regard to the sidewalk, as many of the other commissioners have spoken about it. But the factor is not just affordability. We are trying to make our neighborhoods more walkable. People connect on the sidewalk. People speak to one another when they have a sidewalk. When we don't have sidewalks and there is traffic, how will people come out of their homes and actually connect with their neighbors? That's important. So what is our goal? What are our goals? Why we are building middle housing? What is the purpose behind it? And what is the design elements that will prevent those goals from being achieved? And sidewalks is one of them. We are trying to create a more climate-friendly transportation option. So we are assuming that teenagers are not going to be biking, that people are not going to be biking to work, that they won't bike to their friends' places. And we are asking children to share the road, their transportation of choice of transportation with cars, which we know has not worked. We have a classic example of TV Highway where people are standing by the pole. I have spoken quite extensively about the fact that I have seen a mother, a pregnant woman, actually hold a 1.5 year, I think a toddler. She was holding them by the hand and she had a bag of groceries. She was standing on the side of TV Highway waiting for a bus, and her child tried to jerk their hand free and she dropped the bag of groceries. I wonder if she had let go of the child by mistake, then what would have happened? So sidewalk is not a design issue. It's a safety issue. It's an equity issue. It's a neighborhood issue. It's a relationship building issue. However, when we're talking about affordable housing, when we talk about equity, we are demanding that people maintain the sidewalks, which is completely unfair because everybody will maintain the sidewalks. Not everybody will have the same income all the time. So when we expect that people are going to maintain the sidewalk that we have built to create better neighborhoods, that's inequity. So the sidewalks have to be maintained by the cities and the counties and the state. It is our responsibility to ensure that people have a safe space and that when they're walking, they're not falling. people should be able to call up and say, there is a problem with our sidewalk. If we have the authority to go dig up a sidewalk for any work that we want to do, ensure that trees are there, that may have roots popping out and all of it, it is not fair on our part as county and city to make sure that people are responsible for how the tree roots grow. So we must have sidewalk. We are trying to create more bikeable neighborhoods, more walkable neighborhoods, more climate friendly neighborhoods. So, and we must ensure equity by ensuring that we take the brunt of the maintenance, not the people who are living there. That's an additional burden that they shouldn't have to deal with. If I had a home in any of those places, considering my income, I would not be able to pay $1 for maintenance. That's all. Thanks.
Commissioner Dye and Bidu, I'm not sure who was next. Commissioner Bidu, maybe since you haven't spoken, go ahead, please.
Okay, thanks, Chair Lockwood. I just wanted to add that this is a really complicated decision in terms of supporting or not supporting sidewalks. I agree that the right-of-way is really important. I personally live on a street that does not have sidewalks, and can attest to the fact that it's very hard to meet neighbors, and it makes parents more hesitant to let their kids play outside, play together, ride bikes, just because of safety issues. And in addition to that, we do have a lot of foot traffic on my street, and especially at night, it feels unsafe to walk up and down the road. At the same time, sidewalks are expensive, considering affordability of middle housing, and the possibility that fewer homes will be constructed if there are sidewalks required. It's just, for me, I just want to say that it is something that I will be taking very seriously in deciding, and it's just something that I think I need more information on before. I probably need to do my own research, get some additional information that's already been requested. And I also am curious if there are any resources out there about safety statistics on, fully improved frontage versus not fully improved, just so I can get an idea of what that might look like in terms of the effect, for the average street, if we do not require sidewalks.
Vice Chair Dye.
I can't help but think back to this feeling like it's kind of a 19th century approach to having a home. And what do we look at when we need, or how we define what a home looks like and is. And certainly, when we're homesteading, the goal was to put up a structure so that we had somewhere to live, and that was the affordable way to do it. But then we also had outhouses because the bathrooms were not a consideration, and indoor plumbing wasn't a need then. But we've evolved, and we know that a part of a home is a bathroom and a kitchen and plumbing and electricity. And also, we, as a community, and the exponential growth that this county has seen, we know that to be functional, our community needs a transportation network, needs to have a fully thought out transportation network for bike, pedestrian, safety considerations, and so forth. And so I'm not looking at middle housing and looking at sidewalks as two different issues when we're looking at how do we as a community value what housing looks like and what that housing needs. And we have to think forward as to what as a community we need as we continue to grow. We're not in a period where people are vacating this community and we're losing population. We're continuing to expand. Infill is prevalent in all parts of the county, and we have to be smart about how do we plan what that looks like so that as we continue to grow and bring in more people and have more housing, that we're prepared to do that. And considering a sidewalk as a piece of a home of the housing structure, I don't think is too big of a stretch than to say we're piecemealing it as a component of this. Well, they don't need driveways, they don't need streets, they don't need this. This is a part of the entire package of what housing should look like. And so I certainly am against leaving pieces of the components out for the responsibility later. I also get concerned that we have this right of way that who ultimately was responsible when we do need sidewalks. We're not to the point to where we're not going to need a sidewalk in a community. There will be a need for the sidewalk. Does that now fall on the homeowner who may not be financially equipped because they were just able to get into the house? Are we now expecting them to be able to foot the bill for this large piece of infrastructure now, this sidewalk that we're asking them to build or expecting them to do to be a part of the community? And I just don't want to chance that on the back end later on, that someone will be able to down the line do something that should have been done at the beginning of a project. So I just want that to be considered.
Commissioner Patillo.
Yes, I'm glad we're having a useful or vigorous debate on this. I'm clearly a minority here, but I do want to respond and explain. Want to respond, but then explain my position or clarify it. One is, my understanding is, and not that it's relevant to the ordinance, but I think it might just be for general understanding, is that the property owner is responsible for the maintenance of their sidewalk, not the local government or county government. So if the sidewalk is required or built and it needs to be maintained, and it doesn't meet it's a public hazard, the property owner is responsible and can be forced to make those improvements or repairs. So it does create a burden, but I don't think I think it's a necessary burden if a sidewalk is not safe or is problematic. These are all good points, and I would say 15 years ago, I would be wholeheartedly at the forefront of arguing for it, except we're not 15 years ago. We're now in a housing supply and affordability crisis in many ways. The cost of homes in Washington County, because of market forces, is, I was listening this morning to the CEO of Redfin, a housing software operator. He said it's astounding how much housing has gone up in the last 2 years. Frightening even, because it's almost not sustainable. 20% one year, 22% another year. And we're seeing that in Washington County. And homes that were 700,000 listed are now, some of them are close to $1 million. And that affects all the way down. When we talk about whether this is a prudent strategy or policy to add this on, I just want to remind people, it's not the issue of black and white, no sidewalks. I mean, 90% of what's going to get built is going to have sidewalks per requirement. We're talking about the middle housing piece. So yes, there's merit. Sidewalks have merit. It's not like, no, we don't need sidewalks. That's just a luxury. I don't view them as electrical code issues. I don't view them as hooking up to a sewer. But I do view it that we are now in a different era of housing where it is frightening how expensive it is. And we have so many factors that are weighing unfavorably for future development of housing. The price of materials, particularly lumber and steel and concrete, a lack of available land or surplus land, growing demand in terms of in-migration. Washington County is clearly the economic engine in many ways for the metro area and Portland. And every little requirement, and I think we've seen this, how it is like in the city of Portland, it's, I think, gotten to where it's a straw and a camel's back type of situation. And every time we add one more requirement that maybe middle housing isn't standalone housing. It's usually going to be part of a already developed housing. That's why it's considered middle housing. If you're developing a single family house on a standard lot for a standard development, it absolutely makes sense to have sidewalk requirement, because even if it's the community doesn't have it, because that's the standard for which we want for quality of life. But in a community that's already built out and we're adding middle housing in that community, this is just one more drip, drip, drip that creates maybe one more disincentive, or we need to be making it as easy as possible for people to make a decision proactively to develop middle housing. So that's my position. That said, I do appreciate all of those comments, and I share those sentiments, except for the fact that I view that we're in a different housing era than I'm not going to say how old I am, but I've been in the real estate market since I was in my 20s, and I've never seen a market that is so constrained on supply side and inflated on the price side and has all the factors weighing against it for a continuation of that unfavorable trend. And anything that we do we should be take that in consideration, because without easier to develop housing, we won't have reasonably priced housing or supply of it, and we won't have a community. We'll have elite neighborhoods like Silicon Valley type situation where policemen, fire people, teachers, service folks, even regular middle class waged households are priced out. So, thank you for the discussion.
Commissioner Wellner.
I just, again, want to echo what Commissioner Petrillo just had to say. Very well stated. One key point in what he said, too, was that 90% of what is going to get built will end up having sidewalks, will end up having frontage improvements, and it's probably more than that. It's the SB 458 that allows you to do a subsequent middle housing land division and expedited land division. I wasn't aware until staff's presentation, but it sounds like the county will be able to acquire right-of-way and sidewalk of those expedited land divisions. So that means even more units, middle housing units, will be required to provide that sidewalk and right-of-way. So this not requiring it of all creates some opportunities for those small pockets that might not make sense if you do require that sidewalk, if you do require that right of way to deliver something that's an affordable product. It's not guaranteed that it's going to deliver something that's affordable, but it at least creates an opportunity for those that are looking to create a more affordable end product to be able to do so.
Any other comments? So, Ms. Kelly, did you have a separate presentation on 458? Is that right?
Yes, actually, it was Todd Borkwitz's presentation that I'm going to present it today.
Okay. Since we've been in session, it's just 1 hour. I thought we'd been. Yeah, we're good. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so here we are at middle housing land divisions. I guess that was a good segue, Commissioner Wellner. Next slide, please. So Senate Bill 458 is a follow-up to House Bill 2001. The Oregon legislature passed Senate Bill 458 in 2021, and it applies June 30th of 2022. The intent is to increase options for home ownership by allowing land divisions and fee simple ownership for all types of middle housing, not just townhouses. Without this, individual ownership options for most middle housing would be limited to the condo model or similar to that. The bill provides for an expedited 63-day decision process, largely relying on an existing process that's outlined in statutes. Resulting lots cannot have more than one dwelling unit or be further divided, and we are allowed to condition that they record a related plat note restricting against further division. Next slide, please. House Democrats, in a press release earlier this year, underscored that home ownership is one of the key indicators of household wealth, and that past policies like redlining and discriminatory lending often excluded Black, Indigenous, people of color, community members from home ownership opportunities. Next slide, please. So why middle housing land divisions? They can increase home ownership options for housing types that can better suit a wider range of incomes, life stages, and lifestyles and preferences. They can increase these options within neighborhoods that are typically dominated just by single detached dwellings, which are often beyond financial reach of many people. They can increase access for more people to ownership opportunities in neighborhoods near flourishing schools, recreational amenities, services, and jobs. And they can help build economic and population diversity in these neighborhoods among homeowners. Next slide, please. Middle housing land divisions will be based on approval criteria, including a site plan that shows one dwelling per lot, separate utilities for each unit. No structures can be within protected resource areas. And there have to be easements for things like common areas and utilities and access and so forth. The state does allow us to require street frontage improvements and right-of-way dedication. We can prohibit further divisions, as I noted earlier. But we can't really apply much in the way of additional requirements. Next slide, please. Our upcoming ordinances will include changes to incorporate Senate Bill 458 into our Community Development Code. Not every jurisdiction is doing this. The state statute does call the expedited land division process a non-land use decision, but it's so tied to land use that it only makes sense to include it in our development code. So the CDC organization will involve adding the new term middle housing land division, which will be separate from other types of land divisions, and adding the related procedures for it. So next slide, please. Impacts to our existing county practices probably will mostly be reflected in the growing pains of the staff workload and the learning curve and a shortened review period, just the 63 days versus the usual 120 days for an ordinary land division. All of these things together could complicate processing of these. If we don't issue a decision within the 63-day period, then the applicant can go to circuit court, as they could for a 120-day approval, and compel the court to demand a decision from us. The county can act to extend the 63-day approval window, but on a case-by-case basis. and through a regularly scheduled public meeting. And it's based on we have to provide evidence of an unexpected or extraordinary increase in applications. So it's rather difficult to extend that timeline that we're permitted. Next slide, please. Oh, looks like we're to the question and answer period.
Commissioner Wellman.
Quick question, Ann, is for existing homes that would qualify as middle housing, so say a quadplex somewhere, can you process an expedited land division for that?
You can if it meets all the specifications for HB 2001.
Okay, so basically that they have their own services and have adequate access.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Baidu.
I'm just wondering if staff feels like they have capacity, or if changes would need to be made to staffing levels. If this is put into place.
Andy?
Well, it's kind of a zero-sum game without more staff. So if you create a new requirement that requires certain things to be turned around quicker, it means other things will take longer without more staff. So how do you get more staff? Right now, we're almost entirely fee supported. So it means increasing permit costs. So it's kind of all related. But those timelines are in state law. It's not really a choice to do this. There's a little bit of discretion in how we create the rules for this. So we're going to do it, and frankly, I think it is a really good thing. I mean, the need to get more ownership out there with middle housing is really, really important. So my personal opinion is I'm glad this happened, but it will have staff impact. So it will result in higher fees, or it'll result in some other things taking longer. So those are the trade-offs.
Commissioner Havener.
Thank you. Just a curiosity, would this eliminate or not require, I guess would be a better way to put it, public feedback or input that somebody's changed, or I shouldn't say changing. 2001 allows us to allow them to put a quadplex on a single family zoning. Is that a correct assumption? There isn't the opportunity for public feedback?
There cannot be a hearing for Senate Bill 458, I don't believe. And I will have to look further at the notice requirements.
Because I can imagine, like we have experienced in the past few meetings, we've had quite a bit of significant public input when there was a change in somebody's backyard. Mm-hmm. And I would be curious that what the repercussions are that we remove that ability to have feedback.
Yeah, I will look into the notice requirements further, but we still would have to allow the land division as long as it met the requirements of Senate Bill 458. If we get public comments that relate to noncompliance with any of those comments could influence changes to the proposed plat. But we couldn't deny an application for this based on public comments unless there was some remaining non-compliance with the.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It was interesting. There was a recent survey done in King County about this very, very similar thing. And the respondents thought it was a great idea that additional family dwelling units were allowed on single family dwelling, but 62% of them weren't going to live there. So kind of curious.
Mr. Rapplier.
Yes, I'll just jump in here on that response. And my recollection on that Senate Bill 458 is it does limit the time for comment and a restriction of what can be appealed. And the appeals are to the circuit court. So it really limits the ability for people who are opposed to any kind of infill to object. Thank you.
Commissioner Petrillo is next.
Thank you, Chair. This is a question for Mr. Beck in response to the question raised about staffing. I've always been frustrated by the response or your own limitations that you're dependent upon funding from your own department revenue. Is there a prohibition or a charter problem with using the general fund to supplement staffing?
There aren't legal limitations. It's been more a policy decision historically. I think it does relate historically back to the fact that we are a county as opposed to a city, and so there was.
I understand. I think that's the.
But there's not. But right, for example, this fiscal year we are getting a slightly larger subsidy from the general fund than we have in the past, just because of staffing issues and getting the point of not actually getting the point of layoffs, but actually having discussions about if things don't get better that they could occur. So we have had a subsidy this year. There could be one in the future, who knows? But that's certainly an ongoing discussion with the board.
Yeah, and I just think it's important for us to all step back once in a while and realize that, that despite what might be the reasonable scope of jurisdiction and responsibility for a county, for whatever reason, due to cities not stepping in certain urban areas or whatever it is, the county basically is responsible for all of these urbanized, unincorporated areas, which are fairly significant when you look at other counties like Multnomah and therefore you're stuck with us, and we're stuck with you, which means that as the demands or requirements, one being the fact that there's these large areas, and two, these mandates from the state or other are simply going to require it. And the worst thing would be to be burning out staff because that's what happens. And people flee to go to elsewhere, particularly in this very hard labor market or difficult labor market. So second point, or really a request, is to Ms. Kelly. Could you please forward the last presentation to me, myself, but I assume really it should go to everybody since we didn't get it, or we usually don't get the presentations, but I would like it, and the reason is that one plate that showed why middle housing subdivision or whatever it was called. I think that really in the 4, 5, or 6 bullet points there sums up exactly what we should be thinking about each time we are considering one aspect or another of the middle housing ordinance. We need to keep that in mind. And if you look at, because that really is what the intent is, the legislative intent and the public policy intent. And if we keep those in mind, then everything else sort of, I think, weighs. I think it's the next one, right? And everything else.
It's down.
There we go. Everything else sort of fits like a puzzle then when we understand why and what we're trying to do. And I just want to understand, going back to my argument about sidewalks, this, if the goal is this, why, then we need to be, it's not that sidewalks are the main problem. It's a requirement. It's that anything we do, though, should be to accomplish these public policy objectives that are embedded in the ordinance, the state requirement. And if they're not supporting these or not encouraging these or maybe even discouraging them, then we need to make decisions accordingly. But I would like to have that, because keeping that in front of me every time we have another work session on some other aspect, it would be useful. So thank you.
Sure, we can send those to you.
Yeah, so we always do upload them to the website. After
but I don't remember to do that. I didn't even know it would, and I didn't know you said you uploaded. So
yeah, we can definitely send. Well, one thing just to clarify, in everything we do, there are always competing policy goals. And, Commissioner, like with the statewide planning goals, there are 19 of them, and we can't really say that one is more important than the other. So our job as staff and your job as planning commissioners and the board's job as the board is always to weigh those. And I think at different times, maybe some become more important to people or to the community than others. But it's always a balancing act. And so more housing is critical and important. Ensuring there's adequate infrastructure for the people who are here and who will come is also important. Protecting natural resources is important. So all of those things are difficult to balance, but that's what we all end up doing.
Exactly.
Commissioner Wellner.
Just a follow up on the staffing conversation. There was kind of a light at the end of the tunnel when any new UGB expansions were basically focused on cities, and there wasn't going to be any more North Bethanys in the county, and we only have so much infill that can be built, and ultimately it's going to get built. But that paradigm changed when middle housing was adopted. And now the entire county, the entire unincorporated area, where there's a lot of R5, a lot of large parcels with old houses on them, is ripe for middle housing construction, which is going to be a huge impact on staff time. So I guess I understood the whole fee supported, and I kind of understand the genesis of how we got there, and I know you guys do, but it doesn't make sense in today's reality. And now is the right time to go to the board, and I don't even know who I would talk to. Is it the CAO's office and somebody there that I should be talking to say that we're not operating in the same world that we were operating in 24 months ago, and we can't have a fee supported current and long range or current planning staff. We can't have a fee supported group because it's never going to support itself, and we're always going to have more and more and more work coming our way because of this middle housing. That's it's a huge opportunity, but we need to be prepared to regulate it for it at the same time.
There was a question in there, so I think if you talk to myself or my boss, Mr. Roberts, you're preaching to the choir a little bit. So it's either the CAO or the board, probably the best place to go. And they have hard jobs. There's only X amount of general fund, and there's a lot of demands for courts and other things that they spend that money on. So it's not like an easy decision. So,
Commissioner Podar.
Thank you, Chair Lockwood. I just heard something I wanted to point out. When we talk about needs like the environment, climate, shelter, food, nutrition, develop.
We're not hearing your voice. Did your microphone stop, Commissioner Podar? Still not hearing you.
Are you able to hear my voice now?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I have wavering internet. I was saying that I just heard something about when we oftentimes look at the environment, climate, shelter, nutrition, development, community, and all the various laws that have been designed around it, we often we sometimes tend to think that they are competing needs, but I think our approach needs to be different. That they are all a singular need. That it's just aspects of one thing of building equitable communities, that people must have shelter, but they cannot be sheltered for too long if the climate is impacted. So how do we ensure that climate is addressed as well as the environment, as well as people have accessibility is important, because we can provide as many resources as we want, but if people do not have accessibility to those resources, it doesn't matter whether those resources are there. So everything depends on one another. They are not in isolation, so they are not in competition. I just wanted to highlight that we have to look at it differently. What if we say they are not in competition? They are all together to go towards one goal, that we build equitable communities for humanity. That's the goal, and everything else supports that. That's all.
Thank you. Are there any other comments? Mr. Back.
Well, if there aren't other comments, I just want to first thank the Planning Commission for the past 3 or 4 months. We've been focused on middle housing, and we've got a lot of good input. Teresa, and if you can remind us of kind of the schedule for the next couple months. I think prior to your next meeting, we will actually be filing ordinances that undoubtedly parts of the ordinance individual planning commissioners will look at and go, that's not consistent with my thought. But our hope was that we took a lot of what you provided over the last few months, and really what's important are the hearings on the ordinances and you giving us direction once we have sort of something firm to give you and to comment. So again, I want to thank you for the last 3 or 4 months. I think it's been really, really useful for staff. So Teresa or Ann, do you have an update on kind of the next couple months on middle housing?
Yeah, so we are wildly working away and mostly on the ordinance. It's going to be a very long ordinance. We are touching a lot of sections of the Community Development Code. So we need to file that by next Wednesday in order to have the first Planning Commission hearing at your second hearing in February, which is the 16th of February. So that'll be your first hearing on the ordinance. Right now, we plan that there probably will be 3 ordinances. So the first one will be changes to our comprehensive framework plan to reflect the changes with middle housing. So there are policies in there about housing affordability and availability, and also how we determine the different land use districts. And so all of those needed to have some changes and updates to them. So that'll be one ordinance. The second ordinance will be the primary changes to the code to implement House Bill 2001. And then the third ordinance will be filed a little bit later because it's not directly required by HB 2001. It's required to implement it, and that's the changes that we need to make to our subdivision regulations that we were just talking about with Senate Bill 458. So that'll be a separate ordinance and will come probably 2 to 4 weeks after you get the initial large ordinance. So those hearings will start the 16th of February, and we plan 3 hearings with time for a possible 4th. And we'll probably go through by topic some of these things so that we can discuss in more detail some of the subjects that we've talked about here and how they're addressed in the code language. And our first board meeting is at this time, I'm looking at my schedule, planned for the 19th of April. And then our hope is the 3rd of May. We expect that through the process there will be changes made, so we've planned in an engrossment set of hearings. So there's time then for 2 board hearings, and then ordering engrossment or ordering what changes are, and then 2 more hearings. We're getting a lot of pressure from the state that if we don't have the ordinance effective by July 1st, then the model code will kick in. We had been saying it was adopted by July 1st. So we and a couple other jurisdictions are in discussions with the state about that. But the board had wanted to be able to act before they are completely in the budget. So we moved things up a tiny bit so that they could have that. And hopefully their final hearing June 7th.
So are you saying though you're planning on 3 planning commission hearings for the first, the comprehensive framework plan?
For potentially all 3 of those ordinances.
All 3. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So in that period of time, we'll be bringing those 3 ordinances forward.
Okay.
But the focus initially will be on the comprehensive framework plan and the community development code changes for House Bill 2001.
Okay, thank you.
And we could, between now and that first hearing, we could still have a work session or 2 on some aspects of what we're going to be bringing forward. So that's what we'll still be thinking through with Andy on what parts might help for us to chat about before that.
Any other questions or comments? All right, let's move to the next agenda item, which is consideration of minutes. We've got 2 sets of minutes. The first one is November 3rd. Does anyone have any corrections for that one? Well, I did, or it's just a question at the moment. On page 4, item 7, it says PC Lockwood moved to adopt and so on. So I'm wondering, I don't know what capital P, capital C means, and I'm wondering what's intended.
Probably just missing a word, probably just chair, PC Chair Lockwood.
Okay.
Or actually, PC is probably just replaced with chair, like we have in the first bullet under 6, Chair Lockwood.
Okay. So if there are no other corrections, I propose that we accept the minutes for November 3rd, 2021 as corrected. Is there any objection? Seeing no objection, we accept those minutes. The second set of minutes is for November 17th, 2021. Are there any corrections or questions about those minutes? All right, I don't see any. Propose that we accept them as submitted. Any objections to that? I don't see any, so without objection, we approve those minutes for November 17th, 2021. Our next item on the agenda is communications, Planning Commissioner communications. Does anyone have anything they'd like to bring up at this time? Okay, I don't see any hand. Oh, yes, Commissioner Petrillo.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I wanted to take this time just to address something that's been on my mind, which is the issue of when a proposal is before us and the staff has prepared materials and research and the recommendation, and for instance, in particularly the last two TSP considerations, but it could be any item really, such as middle housing. I think sometimes when we've had a difference of opinion, or when planning commissioners have suggested a recommendation that's different than staff, some argument has been made at times that, well, that for people in favor of the staff recommendation as well, the staff, I trust the staff with what they're doing, and I don't. The inverse of that is somehow maybe the dissenting people from staff don't trust what staff are doing. And I want to clarify that because I've been on the opposite end of staff recommendation on several items. None of us have, staff comes at it from one perspective. We all come at it from a different perspective. And I don't want to staff to feel like a dissenting or opposing a position to their recommendation is a criticism of their work as being inadequate or insufficient. It's not. And even though everyone will say, well, of course we don't view it as, we don't take it personally or as, the fact is that, I work in construction, commercial lending, and I have to take stuff before a committee, and I have to write up these extensive reports just like staff has to, and they take a lot of time and a lot of energy, and then you bring it before people who look at it and say, yeah, but I don't, and you're like trying to defend what you put all the time in. So I do understand there's just human emotion sometimes. I don't want staff to take it personally, but particularly when there's issues, and we've been working on a lot of issues, and we've been putting in a lot of time, and the value of a position of input that maybe doesn't agree is that's what the process is about. And it's not that I don't trust staff or somebody who offers something different doesn't trust staff. It's that we're viewing at it differently. And and that goes really to why we have the Planning Commission. If everything could be trusted to be perfect by what staff produces or is proposed in whatever way, then there'd be no need for the Planning Commission, right? So I just want to make sure that maybe the tone sometimes need to be changed from when opposition is or stated or alternatives are stated. But I also want people to understand that there is a recognition of the hard work and the validity of the work that staff does, in that it's has nothing to do with trust or lack of trust. This is what the process involves, and dissenting should be welcome because it helps us to perfect what the outcome is for the public good. And I think the Board of Commissioners, particularly as it relates to the TSP ones, and other thing has welcomed our input, sometimes even when it is counter to staff. So even though this middle housing is being pushed forth, and we haven't read it to see, and I'm sure there'll be things that I want people to be aware, staff particularly, that there will be things that I will disagree with, and that I very well may propose engrossments. And it doesn't mean that I don't know that I don't think that you don't know what the hell you're talking about. It's that we have differences of opinion and trying to accomplish different, trying to make the outcome the best it can be. So that's a long way to say dissent is important, and we should. It's not a matter of trust or not with staff. So, thanks.
Commissioner Podar.
Thank you, Chair Lockwood. I don't know, somehow this, Commissioner Petreo, somehow this just did not feel in the right way, what was said. The Planning Commission our responsibility, as far as I understood when I took up this responsibility to volunteer my time, is to represent 700,000 people of our community. If the county, and it is not for a person, if the county had historically been doing things right as a collective, things would have been very different. The Planning Commission, the 9 of us, have only one responsibility as far as I understand. This is my perspective, and that's the community. Because we are putting time and effort in to understand our community, their ever-changing needs, their new needs, because we have new people getting added to our community every year. About 10 to 15% new people are joining our county every year. And to understand their needs, their perspective, that the county, when we are, does not necessarily understand, because just like us, they are also in the same position as people. They are in the same position as trying to understand. But trust, of course, just like the county trusts the Planning Commission to put their best foot forward. Same way, the Planning Commission expects the county to put their best foot forward. But I don't think our responsibility. There was something said about tone. I'm sorry, I refuse to tone police myself. My passion comes from community need and community want, and the inadequate, inequitable experiences that the community has or may have. So, no, the Planning Commission cannot tone police themselves based on what we are seeing or what we are experiencing. That is absolutely not going to happen. So I just wanted to highlight that. However, as all of us are people, I do my job, and there are times that I don't do the best job because I don't have all of the information, and I rely on people to give me that information so that I can do a better job. And that's what we are doing. We're supporting one another to ensure that our communities truly get what they deserve. And I wanted to highlight that. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any other comments? Well, I had a couple of things to just briefly mention. One is that we received a reminder from the clerk of the Board of Commissioners, and I think this is a reminder going to all commissions, everybody meeting on Zoom, to keep our cameras on as much as possible. You know, there are going to be brief periods when we turn them off for one reason or another. But if we keep them on, then that ensures that we all know we're here and we're participating in our meeting, in our public meeting. The second one is that we're going to have elections for the leadership positions on this commission in the first meeting in February. So president, chair, and vice chair. Something to think about, think ahead. And then the last one was something Mr. Back brought up, which is that the 19th, the meeting for the 19th has a light agenda. Do you think that could change, Mr. Back? Or should we, I'm wondering, should we try to decide now whether we would want to meet or?
You know, my sense is, especially with this mental housing work, it's moving fast and furious, and we may see more benefit than we do at this point in time to having that meeting and briefing you. So, you know, we can always touch base with the Planning Commission and or the chair and vice chair before the meeting and kind of update you where we think we're going to be at. You know, clearly we don't have any ordinances. It would just be a work session with probably some minutes. But I think I would recommend just keeping it open if you want to get kind of the sense from the Planning Commission about their availability or whether they want to meet or whether they're scheduled to do something else that night. That may be valuable right now.
Okay, so the proposal is that we keep it open, and are there comments or things people want to share about that? Commissioner Petrillo.
Yes, I'd like to see if maybe I would probably prefer keeping it open and using it as an opportunity to talk about parts of the middle housing that we haven't heard a lot about, which is manufactured housing. And I believe there's been some presentations made at the county level by consultants about manufactured housing, and wondering if, you know, the Planning Commission might benefit from hearing some of that from, I believe it's Andrea Tremblay or whomever. But this is one area that is a way to manufactured and also modular is one way for us to address some of affordability and middle housing types. So.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Is there anyone who's opposed? Yes, go ahead, please, Vice Chair Dye.
I guess I just want to get a sense for when that check-in would happen, since that is the same, you know, it's a holiday for that Monday. And so would the check-in happen on the Tuesday, or would it happen sometime the week before, so that, you know, if Chair Lockwood and I and staff want to get together and decide? I just want to get a sense of when you think you'd know.
I think we would have to have our act together early next week, frankly. So we'll let you know before then. So I think the check-in, you know, assume that there's going to be a meeting, and if it looks like either we don't have the ability to get the right folks there for manufactured housing, or there's just, at least from our perspective, it's not worth having, we'll reach out and schedule a time, probably late next week, to confirm, and we can do it via email too, if that's more convenient.
So we would need to send the agenda out by Wednesday. So I think probably it would be best to decide by next Wednesday on that.
Right.
Any other? Yes, Ms. Kelly.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out there is no restriction against prefab or modular buildings as part of
No,
middle housing.
yeah,
So I
and
think
I'm
you're
aware of
maybe
that.
talking about
Yeah.
county housing potential.
But I think people aren't, I think in general, we don't know a lot about it as a housing type. And there's been some discussions going on at different parts of the county, King City, I think, and others about. And, you know, if there is information out there, this is one of the components of housing types. And we have a slot that potentially, and there's already somebody out there who produced something that for the, it might be helpful. That's what I was referring to.
Yeah, we were part of that work with Andre Tremoulet, and so we can talk with her about the timing of a possible planning commission presentation.
Any other comments? Any other commissioner communications? All right, I'm not seeing any hands, so I propose that we adjourn. Is there any objection to adjourning?
Mm-hmm.
Seeing none, we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.